So Jay and David are going to be talking about that, and then we'll have some time for questions and comments at the end of this. There's a number of cases that are involved, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to you gentlemen to start talking about the cases involved. The first one's Lehigh.
I think actually we're going to do Mac and Mac first, if that's okay. Good afternoon, everybody. It's Jay McLean. I start to think of tax cases, for this discussion, and I see these really as an opportunity for us to look at it and say, what can we learn from these? I mean, really, there are not many public domain examples out there for us to look at, SR&ED examples to evaluate. We can use these tax court cases as such. Whether the appeal was successful or was denied, I think we can, take from this as stakeholders, whether you're a claimant preparing a claim, whether you're CRA, or whether you're a practitioner trying to prepare a high-quality submission. So that's kind of the mindset that I have anyway when we started to look and dissect at the Mac and Mac case. So perhaps maybe we can do a little bit of background on Mac and Mac Hydrodemolition. This case actually was finalized at the very end of 2017. Most of us would have read this in 2018, but it related to work performed back in 2012 and 13, so quite some time ago. And the focus of this case was really around SR&ED documentation. The outcome was the taxpayer was not successful in appeal, but like I said, I think there's a few things we can discuss around this case, ask some what-if questions, and actually I have a bit of a comparison with another 2017 case that was successful. So with that in mind, there you'll see in your package or on the screen. Let's dive into the project details, just high level, and then we'll look at kind of what the judge said, just as a reminder of the background on this case. So the short of it was there was 2 SR&ED projects submitted by this taxpayer. Both of them involved large metal pipes that were used to transport bitumen. So the inside of these pipes were actually lined with 1/4-inch rubber, and that rubber was lined in turn with 1-inch polyurethane. So over time, with the material flowing through the pipe, these pipe liners wore out, which meant they had to be replaced. So the taxpayer tried to develop a method to remove the entire lining without damaging the pipe. And that was essentially Project 1, or what we might call Activity 1 here. Project 2 was an attempt to develop a method to remove only the polyurethane lining and leave the rubber lining intact. So kind of a little bit of high-level background there. I mean, the taxpayer used many different techniques to try and remove the linings, all revolving around the use of high-pressure water. So if I was just to jump ahead a little bit here and look at Project 1 or Activity 1, the taxpayer used a process hydrolysing, and essentially this takes 2 nozzles that were attached to a device, and they drag this device through the pipe in order to attempt to remove the liner on Project 1. And so during the project, they evaluated and changed a whole bunch of different parameters and did a whole bunch of testing. You can see on the screen there and in your package, I mean, they varied the different angles of water spray, the different water pressures, increased the number of nozzles. They tried, varying the size of the nozzles. They adjusted the distance between the nozzles, the lining, making the arms in which the nozzles were mounted, allowing them to rotate, making the nozzle heads themselves spin, changing or varying those speeds, and also adjusting the speed in which these nozzles were dragged through the pipe in order to try to remove that lining. And in the case, the facts outline that these were done kind of one variable at a time. So very high level, that's what Project 1 was about. Project 2 is about developing a different method of, and they refer to this as milling, where they're trying to just take away that polyurethane lining and leave the rubber lining. So again, they tried a variety of different techniques. They varied water pressure. In this project, they also rotated the pipe while they were trying to mill the material off, and sometimes they tried that in the same direction as which the arms were rotating inside the pipe, and they also did that in the opposite direction. They varied the speed of the rotation of the pipe, and they altered the number of passes that the apparatus made through the pipe. So you can see there's a lot of different attempts here that were made, and again, only one of these variables were evaluated at any given time. So with that as kind of the background, let's jump into some of the judge's comments. The judge made a comment that the taxpayer did have handwritten notes, and they were compiled weekly. Although the other comment about the notes were that they were vague and had scant details and did not contain any hypotheses. The notes did, however, indicate that different nozzle sizes and different angles were evaluated, but did not specify which specific sizes or angles. And there was very little information about the results of the tests in these handwritten notes. So the conclusion to all of that really, and this is a statement the judge made, is that there is simply no way that someone, even someone very experienced in the industry, could hope to replicate or confirm Mac and Mac's results from these notes. Okay, and then one other item I think that we should highlight is that a spreadsheet was prepared and entered into evidence in this case. It was much more detailed than the original handwritten notes. However, it was prepared after the fact, and so the judge did not give this much weight. So in this case, the judge relied heavily on the Northwest Hydraulics previous case, and the scientific method was referenced. Specifically, question 5 was not met. Question 5, again, you'll remember, is that did the taxpayer keep detailed records and hypotheses, tests, and results as the work was performed? So that's one of the items that the judge hung his hat on. Also, he commented about another SR&ED case, High, Webb, and Page. And in that case, the judge made a comment that it's critical to adhere to the scientific and experimental method. Also goes on to say that detailed step-by-step logging, analysis, measurement is a mandatory requirement. Okay, so the taxpayer, I'm sure, was not happy with this outcome, but this was the judge's ruling. And I think I stand back and I kind of wonder, well, how could this outcome have been different? Right? What are there any lessons learned for this from the SR&ED stakeholders' perspective? So I guess that's where it leads us to the next point, where we start to ask ourselves, well, what if? Right? And so we've assembled a few kind of slides around what if. And what if Mac and Mac did have better documentation? What if they decided to try and define the prior art? Try to define what is their knowledge base at the start of this project and what are the limitations? Possibly they could have outlined, that they did some internet searches and documented them. Maybe they find 3 articles that might relate. Maybe they do a patent search, Google patent search. And, just for, an example, we went ahead and did one of these. What if Mac and Mac did a prior art search? What would it look like? And so you have to start, this kind of uses Google Patents. And so as we did this as kind of a test just for today's discussion. And you have to start with entering some key search terms. So if we use search terms such as removing 2 layers of a liner, avoiding pipe damage, that sort of thing, then Google Patents gives us a bunch of output. You can see a screenshot here, 3 different items. The first item is a US item. The second and third item are both international based. The second item, if I was just to kind of high level summarize that, it says, okay, this is an invention that relates to a method of manufacturing the tubing assembly and inner tube lining. Okay. Item number 3 here talks about, this is a method of continuously preparing a length of cured pipe liner. And so it's not quite what we're looking for. If you select the top one there, and we have another screenshot here. In this one, if you can see the top line, I mean, it talks in the abstract a little bit about how this is a process for lining an existing pipeline with a flexible resin. So it's not really what we're looking for. It's talking about pipes, it's talking about lining, but it's not really hitting the removal of some of the specifics of the Mac and Mac case. So you continue to look down the search results, Google patents, and we find, well, maybe we should change our search terms a little bit. And so we changed that, and you can see on the screen there, we added them to say, okay, remove pipe liner, as well as include pipe rotation and water jets. Okay, so this then pulled up this example, another screenshot, where it says that bituminous and other coatings are removed from a pipe surface by directing powerful water jets under pressure of 300 to 600 bar, and it goes on to talk about how they did this. And I say, okay, this is somewhat similar. We're now at least talking about removing items, linings, and whatnot from a pipe, but it doesn't really relate to polyurethane. But you can see how this may have been useful at the beginning of a shred project to document the knowledge base. So, I mean, if in fact Mac and Mac would have done something like this, and you can see how quickly we went through this and pulled up some items, perhaps, maybe, the outcome might have been different. You never know. If we continue on and ask ourselves, okay, what if, knowing that the shred documentation was kind of the weak part in Mac and Mac, what if they did outline their objectives? Perhaps maybe it was removing the liner while avoiding pipe damage of, say, pipe erosion of less than 1 millimeter or maybe 2 millimeters or whatnot. What if Mac and Mac had also outlined and had better description of the testing, the trials and the prototypes? I mean, perhaps they did 100 or they did 78 trials on 8 different lengths of prototype pipe. Would the outcome have been different? It's hard to say, but this makes me think of a second case that was also a 2017 case, and it's Formadrain Inc. And if I was just to kind of do a high-level comparison of Mac and Mac and the Formadrain case, I think you can see on the notes here, maybe I should give a little bit of a background on the Formadrain for those who may not remember it. The Formadrain case was also tested a variety of different parameters like Mac and Mac. Funny enough, it involved piping as well. And the case for Formadrain was successful for the taxpayer. It was an informal proceeding, so it was limited to $25,000 per year. And they were looking at concrete pipes that crack or break in the ground, and they're expensive to replace because you have to excavate and dig them out. So the taxpayer, Formadrain, was developing a new process and a polymer that could allow for, above ground polymer spray applications that would take place inside the pipe while the pipe's in the ground. So this would result in forming a new pipe layer. Essentially think of it as a pipe within a broken pipe. And in this case, the taxpayer, Formadrain, outlined objectives and goals. They outlined and talked about the weight of the plastic, the thickness and requirements of that, the activation time of the polymer, the chuck design. So there's a lot of more specific details in that case that the Mac and Mac case was missing. So I kind of wonder if Mac and Mac had that, whether they'd be maybe in a different position. The case for Formadrain also has, as was mentioned in Mac and Mac, it has a logbook, handwritten logbook that was taken, but in Formadrain they had more descriptions and photos, and Formadrain was able to show that they had an average of 20 tests carried out per year. And I'm not sure whether it was, an impact on the outcome of this case or not, but Formadrain had successfully licensed their technology to other companies. But one thing I think did have an outcome on this case was the owner of the business, the employees, and the expertise of the witnesses were very strong, and I think probably did influence the outcome. So Formadrain was successful in its appeal. There are a lot of similarities between the two, and there's some differences. And they both were held in 2017. And so if I was to kind of wrap up a bit on the Mac and Mac case, I asked myself, would better documentation have resulted in a successful appeal like it did in Formadrain? The other takeaway I have from the Mac and Mac case is I think there's a focus that will be given to contemporaneous documentation versus after the fact evidence. So as stakeholders, practitioners, claimants that are preparing claims, I think you can take some lessons from this and say, okay, what could you do a little differently, and quite possibly maybe you could have the desired outcome if in fact that's what Mac and Mac I'm sure was looking for. So at a high level, that's the Mac and Mac case. I know, Dave, you have a couple other cases that you wanted to touch on. I'll pass the virtual mic to you.